Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thank you for that really nice introduction. I appreciate that. That was very, wow. He already made me sound very much more awesome than I actually am, so I'll skip past that. Well, just briefly, I work with Dries at Acquia at the office of the CTO, and my role in the Drupal project as both a Drupal 7 and a Drupal 8 core committer. So I help lead development efforts of the new version of Drupal. I help keep the old version of Drupal stable. And I'm a Drupal Association board member, and I wrote the Using Drupal book with a couple of co-authors, Addie Berry and Bruno Debont. So today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Drupal 8. So we'll cover stuff like the timeline for Drupal 8, what's planned in Drupal 8 for end users, site builders, designers, and themers, and developers. And then the most important topic is how you can help. And I know a lot of you out here are sitting there going, what? Why are you talking to me about Drupal 8? You know, I'm finally using Drupal 7 and the modules are ported, and why are you sitting here talking to me about stuff that's like at least a year down the road, I'm not going to use it anymore, and this is why. So if we look at the Drupal 8 timeline, you can see that back in January of 2011, we shipped Drupal 7.0. So that was when the development cycle of Drupal 7 ended. And then we had a little bit of a gap. We began development of Drupal 8 in March of 2011, and for the most part, that was because we migrated to Git as well on Drupal.org, which, yay, Git! We love Git, right? So we began development in March of 2011, which was, you know, approximately like 18 months ago or so. We have this deadline coming up in December, which is called feature freeze. At that point, all of the things that we're going to put into Drupal 8 need to be done. So that means if we do any cool new features, if we do cool API changes to make things easier, if we throw in a new UI for all these kinds of things, these kind of major things that are going to define what Drupal 8 is need to be done by December 1st. Then we have a code freeze in February, and the code freeze is when we stop, you know, changing stuff around. We really try and make the APIs stable so contributed modules can begin porting. And then in August-ish, whenever DrupalCon Europe 2013 is, that's our goal to ship Drupal 8.0. So basically, this time next year, our hope is to be able to ship everything. So the reason we're talking about this now is that that date is not very far away, because this is where we are right now. And you can see that there's a very, very small gap there, and so we really need everybody's help to just power through this last little bit, because this is really it. Whatever we can get done between now and December, that's going to define what Drupal 8 is. So in short, it's really time to kick ass with Drupal 8 right now. So I'm going to show you a few things. I have to have a disclaimer that all of this stuff is under construction, and not all of it is guaranteed to make it into Drupal 8. This is all just stuff that people are working on, but it's all going to depend on who helps. So remember, we can't do it without you. So here are the major initiatives we have at the moment: configuration management, web services, layouts, multilingual, and mobile. And you can see that for the most part, we're done with the analysis phase. We figured out what we want to do. We're heading into the design phase, and in a lot of cases are finished with that, which is how we're going to do it. But there's a whole lot left in terms of implementation on a lot of this stuff. So we do need help. So let's go ahead and run through the changes. So for proposed changes for end users and clients, we have things like mobile. Mobile is intended to go after this opportunity. So there you can see there's a little blue planet there for all Drupal sites in the whole entire universe. And there's a little bigger red planet behind there, which is all CMS sites. So Drupal's only a tiny portion of all of the sites out there powered by a CMS. But then when you look at all sites in the whole world, very few of those are powered by a CMS at all. They're using a lot of static HTML and things like that. But then if you look at the device explosion on mobile, you know, it's huge. And there are in fact countries that don't even really use desktop devices anymore. They just power it all through mobile phones because they're cheap, they're available anywhere, that kind of thing. So we need to be ready for this, because the next 5 years is going to cover when Drupal 8 is available. So some of the problems that we're trying to solve is, have you ever looked at Drupal 7 and your iPhone or whatever out of the box? It's kind of not very good looking. You have little scroll bars going back and forth. When you go into the admin screen, it gets all jumbled up because, you know, the toolbar wasn't designed for sort of mobile first. And so, you know, in Drupal 8, what we're really trying to do is streamline things. We're trying to put responsive themes. We actually have a responsive Bartik theme and a responsive Stark theme in core. And then we're working on 7 and the toolbars and stuff like that. One area where we need help is brainstorming around what that toolbar should look like, because we're in the middle of implementing this thing on the Spark distribution, which is a Drupal 7 distribution attempting to prototype Drupal 8's user experience improvements. But we really need a spec. So if you know stuff about that, there's a code sprint happening on Friday. That would be great for you to attend. Another big component of mobile, though, is front-end performance. So this is a graph I stole from the internet somewhere. But what it shows is that we spend all of this time optimizing the back end, making sure that we're using APC on our PHP installation, that we have really well tuned databases and all this kind of stuff. But the fact is that on a typical request, the back end portion of that is extremely small compared to all of the stuff that happens after the page is served, which is rendering all of the HTML into the DOM. It's grabbing the external JavaScript and images and all this kind of stuff and factoring that in. That's really what takes the most time. And so we need a big push on people to try and optimize that whole front-end performance because, of course, it's extremely important with mobile devices, which are less capable than desktop devices and have crappier bandwidth as well. So John Elbin is the initiative lead for the mobile initiative. He'll be there on Friday running mobile sprints. If this is an area that sounds interesting to you, you should completely come and check it out. If you're not here on Friday, that's too bad. But if you're not here on Friday, they also meet on IRC every other Wednesday, and you can find more about it there. Authoring experience improvements is the next major area. So these people are representing the victims of Drupal, right? Because we create our nice Drupal sites, and we use all these modules, and we put them together, and then we hand them off to people who have to then use those sites 30 hours a week as part of their job. And so all they do is they create content, they administer content, they ban people, whatever they do, but they have to work with Drupal's administrative interface, and out of the box, that's extremely poor. And even if you use best-of-breed contributed modules, it also isn't that great compared to other solutions. So Dries laid out this timeline for authoring experience that we do a kind of analysis in April and May, design in June and July, and then an implementation phase, which is basically now, we would start taking some of those ideas from the community and start getting them into Drupal 8 so that they're available out of the box. So one major initiative coming out of the community is a restyled content creation page. And what it's essentially done is taken all the settings that are at the bottom of the form and kind of moved them over to the sidebar and given them obvious styling that it's like, this is stuff you don't really need to worry about unless you think you need to go in there. And then they sort of cleaned up the form that the content editors use to fill out their content so that it's not quite so overwhelming with all the choices and things like that. And then in a mobile device, what will happen is when this squishes down, the column will just swip underneath the column will collapse into the main column. And so you'll just see kind of one big scrolling thing like you do on Drupal 7. But for the desktop experience, this should be pretty good. We also have the Spark distribution, which I mentioned. This is a project that Acquia is heading up, but we definitely want community involvement in this because what we're trying to do is really go after big proprietary CMSs and make Drupal kick their ass in authoring experience. And we've been doing a lot of BOFs and a lot of sessions this week, and so far community reception seems to be pretty good. So that's exciting for us. But we're trying to shift efforts shortly into really going into Drupal 8 and sort of lending some power behind other initiatives. So some of the features in Spark are in-place editing. So the ability to, instead of having to hit edit and go to a separate page that doesn't look like your page, and then you hit preview, and then you get the same content twice, because that's helpful somehow. Yay. Instead of that, what we have is the ability to actually edit the visible contents of the page right in place, right as you see it. So if you see a typo, click into it, make your changes, click save, done. And then, of course, the content editing page will still be there in case you need to edit something that's not visible, like the workflow state or URL alias or something like that. How can you help? Boyan Summers, is he here, by the way? Probably not. He kind of knows all this stuff, but he's our usability team lead in the community. He's heading this stuff up, as well as Roy Schulten. They meet, if you're interested in usability, these are great guys to talk to. They meet on IRC every other Monday. I'm sure there'll be sprints on Friday for this stuff as well. All right, site builders. How many people consider themselves site builders in the audience? Quite a few, okay. So here's some stuff that impacts you. One is multilingual, and the goal there is to try and add all of the APIs required to have stuff like internationalization of configuration, of content, of everything, of the interface translation, but without the need to install like all of these modules, right? Has anybody ever tried to build a multilingual site, especially in Drupal 7? Yeah? It's kind of a pain in the ass, eh? Yeah, it's like, you need this and this and this and this. And then, God forbid, that you decided to translate some of your stuff as nodes as opposed to as fields, and then those two are incompatible, and it's sort of like, so the plan for Drupal 8 is to basically have just, some basic streamlined stuff. So you have your interface translation, which is essentially locale module right now. You have your content translation, so the ability to translate nodes and user, well, probably not users, well, maybe user profiles and stuff like that. Anything that's an entity, more or less. As well as the, sort of your language support. And then they sort of like, there's language stuff all over the place, and so they're sort of consolidating that into a couple of streamlined modules. And then the goal is even to pull in stuff like, currently when you need an updated translation for your site, you have to go to localize.drupal.org, and then there's like 1,000 of these little PO files you have to put into various places. They're trying to build that stuff in out of the box so that when you update your translations, just like you can update your modules in Drupal 7, it can pull it all in. If anyone is around Saturday and Sunday, Gabor Hoishi is leading a multilingual sprint. There'll also be one on Friday with the rest of the sprints, but go meet with him. He'd love to have your help on making this stuff a reality. And that's Gabor's information here. Blocks and layouts, or the SCOTCH initiative, is another one that heavily impacts site builders. Some of the problems that we're trying to solve with this are that currently we have sort of this weird situation where when you're building out your page or you're building out your theme, you have a lot of things on that page are blocks, right? You have the left sidebar, the right sidebar, the content area. Everything that's in those things is blocks, but then not everything, right? You got this site name, which is this weird thing. You have these primary links, or I forget what they call them, in main menu variable in Drupal 7. All these things that are not blocks, and you can't do things with them, and it's a different pipeline to theme them, and it's all very confusing. There's also not really the concept of multiple layouts in core. There's the concept of one layout that's bendy. So in other words, if you don't have a left sidebar, it'll fill it in so that you don't have a gap there. But the rendering pipeline is still like just shove everything through one thing and then like get it all integrated like that. And the really tough part with that is that when you build one of these blocks, that block is rendered in isolation. It doesn't know anything about the page within which it's being shown. So it's like, hi, I'm a block sitting out here, but I don't know that, I'm actually a block on a node page, and therefore I should pull in some node reference information into this block. You have to kind of fake it with a block because they don't have that context or that concept of context. And then another annoying thing is you can't reuse a block in multiple instances. So if you want your user login block to appear on the left sidebar, everywhere else on your site except for this one part you want on the right sidebar, you can't, because you use that one user login block already one time. So you need contributed modules for this. You need to duplicate the block for this, and it's very annoying and confusing. So in Drupal 8, the battle plan is to sort of flip the rendering model inside out. And you basically outside in. So essentially you start by building the page and then fill out the page with the stuff inside of it. And that accomplishes a few different things. One is that you can actually have real layouts, similar to what Panels does. Without being panels necessarily, but the ability to say, here's my page, this is my layout, here are my regions, and then everything within that has context of the request all the way up. And that's really, really useful for being able to build blocks that are reusable across multiple layouts. And the nice thing about rendering the blocks independently from each other is that it supports things like edge-side include caching. So the way Facebook scales is that you have this page with all of this stuff going on. But it's only like little parts of the page that actually update all the time. The rest of the page is just static. It doesn't bother rendering that out every time you hit Facebook. And so this would allow things like saying, everything on my home page can be just like cached for an hour or 2 hours, who cares, that kind of thing. But this one block that's a stock ticker, I need that to update every 10 seconds. So you can do things like that, and it's extremely flexible. We're still prototyping the UI for all of this stuff. So Boyan Summers from the usability team is doing a lot of that work. Within the Spark team, we've also built this responsive layout designer, which currently is layered on top of Panels. But essentially what it does is it allows you to set up different breakpoints. So you say, I want a 320, 768, and a 1024 breakpoint size. And then you can set up custom layouts per breakpoint size that sort of follow the DOM model. And what it does is it generates extremely clean markup, because a lot of people hate Panels because it's like div, 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 span, 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 div, 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 span. And this way, it would just be one sort of cohesive thing. So that's the stuff that we're working on. You know, we need things like panels in core, more or less, page manager in core, sort of. We also need the plugin system, which we actually have now in Drupal 8. We have a nice plugin system so that these things are all swappable. And then there's a bunch of other stuff that we need, you know, in terms of like building access controls around these things and stuff like that. It's a low-level initiative like that we need development help on, but it'll have tremendous benefits for site builders if we can pull it off. So if this sounds interesting to you, please contact Chris Vanderwater. He's the leader of the SCOTCH initiative. All right, this one's pretty exciting. Views in mother bleeping core. Yay! So the problem this is trying to solve is that, yeah, I messed up this slide. So basically, Drupal 7, as I mentioned, was released in January of 2011. People actually started using it in about July of 2011. And then it finally surpassed Drupal 6 in usage in February. So basically, there's a year gap, right? Between when we worked so hard to get you know, something out the door for release, yay, between when people could actually start using it in production websites. So with views being available in core, it allows us to shorten that time frame because a lot of these modules are waiting on these sort of infrastructure modules like views to be available. So it's sort of like everybody that depends on views is sort of held up until views is ported, then they can start porting, and then it sort of leads to this cascading effect. And of course, nobody updates their Drupal websites until all the contributed modules are available. Another problem we're trying to solve is has anyone here heard of the Snowman initiative? It's kind of a little, okay, a couple people. Snowman is an initiative to solve the problem of, you know how when you install Drupal, and its big, you know, welcome to Drupal thing is a blank page that says you don't have any content yet. That's awesome, you know, like, I feel so welcome now. Thank you, Drupal. I have no content yet. Bad, okay. So the thing is trying to solve is like, what if we had a nicer experience out of the box? What if we had some demo content? What if we actually set up a Drupal site, you know, that was, you know, you could turn it off or whatever, but we set it up that actually expressed what Drupal could do. It had things like photo galleries and things like, you know, event listing pages or anything like that. And the problem is, to do any of those kinds of things, like a user login block or an event listing, you need views. You can't really do any of that with just the stuff that comes out of the box in core, because the only thing that comes out of the box in core is a crappy front page listing and taxonomy term listings, and that's about it. So we're trying to solve this issue. So one thing that's really cool is right now, as I speak, you can download the Drupal 8 version of views and it actually works. So the goal is to try and move a lot of elements of the CTools module into core. So things like there's an object cache thing, which allows, you know, views to do its preview stuff. There's a bunch of UI elements that we're going to want to reuse across multiple places in core. And then, you know, the big advantage of something like views in core also is that some of these other initiatives that we're doing, it really helps to validate that our approach is correct. And we'll be able to make changes to the APIs where they're not in time so that we can fix these things before release, as opposed to finding out 3 months after release that when views tried to port, oh, whoops, we forgot about this major chunk of the API. So it's really, really helpful. The Views in Core initiative is currently trying to get funding to fund their team. So if Views in Core sounds interesting to you, if the ability to have Core do something useful out of the box instead of something crappy out of the box sounds interesting to you, go to angrydonuts.com, or it's also on the Views homepage or project page, and please donate to the cause, because we've got a really narrow timeline. They're doing a bunch of great work, and it would be great to get those guys funded. All right, changes for designers and front-end developers is the next topic. How many people consider themselves themers or front-end developers? Okay, cool. The first thing you might be excited about is HTML5. So we have all of the page templates, pretty much all of the templates except for a small handful of them are all HTML5. So they're using, you know, doc type, they're using different types of elements like that. We also have HTML5 form elements natively. If you caught Dries' keynote, he kind of already covered this. But you can do things like, say, use a telephone element in your form, and then it will restrict the it'll restrict the dial pad, you know, restrict the keyboard to only showing the dial pad instead of showing all of the letters and numbers. So it allows a smoother, you know, sort of operation on mobile. Here's a before and after, which doesn't come out very well here, but before and after HTML.tpl.php between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. And basically what you can see is we've gotten rid of XHTML, we've gotten rid of RDFA stuff specifically printed there, and instead it's moved to like a much more streamlined generic, there are attributes that you can print out, and it just takes care of everything. We also have a few tags to optimize the output from mobile. We're also trying to do a bunch of markup cleanup. I mentioned that div, 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 span, 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 div, div, div problem. Because right now our markup makes Jeffrey Zeldman cry. Oh. So there's a bunch of people working on this problem. They're doing things like creating standard components. So Jacine, the former HTML5 initiative lead, you know, she went ahead and sort of created these patterns of like, when I actually display an image, this is what I'd like the HTML source to look like, and this is what I'd like the PHP output to look like. And I understand there's going to be people sprinting on this on Friday. So if you're sick and tired of div soup, that would be a great place for you to jump in and help. Twig is another major initiative around front-end development. So in Drupal 7, you know, we have these template files that are sort of kind of mostly HTML, but there's also a lot of PHP code thrown in there, you know, and there's a lot of weird, you know, functions like render and hide and show, and it's not clear when you use those and when you don't. The way Twig works is it kind of does it based on these little token replacements almost. And Twig is actually extremely powerful because, one, it enforces separation between your front end and your back end logic. So you can't just chuck, you know, 1,500 lines of SQL in your page.tpl.php. You actually have to maintain that separation. But the second thing is this is much more secure. Because in Drupal 7's theme layer, you really have to know whether that variable coming in has been sanitized or not. And if it hasn't, you need to know all of the security functions you need to call on that. Twig is going to take care of all of that and make it really, really streamlined. So there's people working on that on Friday as well. And then finally, I have to end on a sad note. We ended up killing IE 6 and 7. Aww. So not only can you work with some of the best and brightest people that Drupal has to offer, but you don't have to care about IE6. So you should totally work on core, right? Okay. Now we're going to do changes for coders, and I have to warn you that things are about to get geeky. So how many people are geeks? Yeah, okay, we're all geeks, that's cool. All right, so the first geeky initiative is web services, which is sort of like services in core, only better. And the problem that we're trying to solve with web services is that right now, Drupal assumes that every single request that it serves is going to be a fully rendered, themed HTML page sent to a desktop browser. And the problem is that if you want to do something other than that, like let's say, no, I'm just having a little JSON you know, callback that just gives me the autocomplete of the usernames or something like that, it still runs through the whole pipeline. It loads the theme system, the form API, everything else. And then at the very end, you have to kill this part so that it doesn't actually push the content through the theme layer, you know. And that's A, not very performant at all because you're sort of loading way more stuff than you need. And B, it's just a false assumption because these days, you know, you have no idea what's on the other side of that request. It could be an HTML, you know, compliant dev, you know, browser thing on a desktop. It could be a mobile device. It could be a Flash application. Well, nobody uses Flash anymore, but you know. So this kind of thing. And so in Drupal 8, the vision is you turn Drupal into this thing that just takes requests and returns responses. And the default response is the HTML page. So for people who are site builders, they won't notice any difference. But if you are a developer who needs to work with one of these other technologies, you need to integrate with other systems, or you need to build a kiosk application or whatever, you can totally do that because Drupal can feed you out the stuff that you need. So the plan for Drupal 8 is we're actually moving huge components of the Symfony project into Drupal 8 core. Fabian Pontentier, the Symfony team lead, spoke earlier today about some of that stuff. And this is really interesting because Drupal in the past has kind of gotten criticized for like a not invented here syndrome, and that we will go out of our way to invent things that already exist because we think we can do it better. You know, we kind of have that. There's that idea that exists. But this stuff was really like, we knew we wanted to switch to this model of where Drupal's a central content repository that's publishing out to multiple devices. And we were like, okay, well, we can build this ourselves, but let's actually take a look out there and see what else does that. And we found that Symfony is actually really well architected, and it does this already. So if we can integrate their stuff in, not only will we solve our immediate problem, but we'll also solve the problem where like developers coming into Drupal from other technologies and frameworks that are object-oriented, that have clean separation between things, and don't have things like arrays of arrays of arrays of arrays. As much as I love arrays of arrays of arrays. They'll find it easier to get into Drupal. Even if some of us who have more legacy knowledge are going to find it a little bit harder to get into Drupal 8. On the whole, I think it's best for the ecosystem and sort of inviting more people to come and play with us. So, Larry Garfield is the Web Services Initiative lead, and he'll also be sprinting on Friday. So that would be a great thing to help out with if you've ever worked with services module, if you have experience with some of this stuff going in and out, or if you have Symfony experience particularly. One of the things we're trying to do right now is sort of integrate Symfony into our menu routing system so that you have the ability to pass in I'm gonna get this wrong, like a MIME type of the type of content you're trying to get and get that back, and then also what type of request it is. Is it a get or a post? We want to store some of this information so that menu router items know how they should respond based on the incoming data. Configuration management is another geeky feature we're doing. Does everybody run into this problem? You have node ID 4 over here on your dev server, and you have node ID 4 over here on your production server, and you try and move it over, and it just explodes everywhere. So these are some of the problems that we're trying to solve. So, you know, a best practice is definitely to have a dev and a live environment separately, because that way you can mess around in your dev environment and do funny things and do whatever you need to do while the live environment stays running. And Drupal's great because, you know, anybody, even without programming experience, can use it. They just open up a web form and they start changing settings and they click save and it changes instantly, and that's lovely. Until you get to the point where you want to move it to your production website, because all of those things are in the same database. Your content's in the same database as your configuration, as your users and everything else. So you can't just chuck the whole database over, right? Because then you're going to miss all of the content that got posted between the last time you updated production and while you were futzing around with your development site. So, you know, there are many different ways that people have thought to solve this problem. You know, there are things like exportables, there's things like features, there's things like variable set or variable get using update hooks. I think most people employ the napkin approach, which is where you take out a napkin and you write down, I went to administer, content types, blah, 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 you know, and you write down the steps and then you do them again on production, right? Like that's also a valid thing. But it's a complete pain in the butt, right? It's like there's many different ways. All of these things are not always compatible with each other, and it's a little bit cumbersome to manage. So the plan for Drupal 8 is to do it like this instead, where, you know, as you're clicking around in your interface and you're saving settings, what it's actually doing is it's writing through to both a database as a cache of that information, but also to files. So these little YAML files, they are. Like just little, YAML is just like, they look a lot like info files, honestly. They're just like text, colon, and then value. So that when it comes time to move that to your live environment, how you do it is you move it over with version control, like if you have your stuff in Git, or even FTP if you are old school and you really enjoy insecure protocols. You can move it over that way. And then on the production website, you do an explicit import operation, which will take the stuff from the file server and then, from the file system and move it up into the caching system so it then uses this instead. The other thing that we're doing to solve the content staging problem is adding UUIDs, which are big, like 64-character unique identifiers to different entities in core, so users and nodes and things like that. Because that way, even if both of those are called node 4, it can look at the UUIDs of both of them and see that they're different and know, oh, this doesn't actually exist over here, so let's move it over and just give it a different ID. So some really awesome things happening. There's a lot of energy around this, but they always need help. Particularly what needs help right now is converting all of the old systems we have that are still using variable get and variable set over to this new configuration system. So Greg Hayrocker Dunlap is the person leading that. And I don't know that he's formally running a sprint on Friday, but he's definitely around. And so talk to him. He'd love to have more help in his initiative. There's also a whole bunch of other stuff development-wise. You know, in general, this proudly found elsewhere thing, where we're really looking for common patterns. We're looking for libraries we can incorporate in to sort of take some of the base framework stuff that we're responsible in Drupal and sort of like pull it in as other components of other projects that can then take care of that. What we're trying to do is essentially what we did with jQuery when we chose that for their JavaScript framework in Drupal 8 is in Drupal 5, is we took a lot of load off of our core developers to have to know all of that stuff. Now we don't have to design our own JavaScript framework, we just use this one instead. And it already conforms to best practices, and billions of other people are using it, so we get to get their benefit from their upstream improvements. So it's a similar thing that we're trying to do with various components of our framework. We're also, like a lot of people have criticized Drupal 7 and below in the past for not being object-oriented. It's sort of this procedural thing, and a lot of people who've learned PHP since about, I don't know, 2007 or something, probably learned object-oriented PHP. It's just a factor of Drupal's age as a legacy platform that it's so procedural, because back when Drupal started, we were on like PHP 3 or maybe even 2. It was a long time ago. So you'll notice when you check out Drupal 8, there's a lot more object-oriented code, a lot more classes, a lot more hierarchies, and it looks a lot more like other applications that you might have used before in the past. There's also a much better entity API, much better. It's got full CRUD operations, meaning create, read, update, and delete. So you no longer have to download this stupid entity API module that's separate from core for some reason to get all the rest of the stuff. It's all integrated in, which is great. The test bot and the automated tests in Drupal 8 run a lot faster. Daniel Kudvine, or Sun, has spent an enormous amount of time trying to get that working. We also have file and media improvements being led by Dave Reed in the media initiative. So there's all kinds of stuff that's happening that's not part of the initiatives that still really moves Drupal 8 forward. And if you want a list of all of those, you can find them at drupal.org/list-changes. This is sort of the new version of our Drupal 7 to 8 upgrades page. And so this catalogs everything that we've done. And it's a good page to get familiar with, because eventually when Drupal 8 ships and your job becomes porting all of your modules to Drupal 8, this is going to be a really handy resource for you to know about. So I'd like to pause and give a huge round of applause to over 600 contributors who've contributed to Drupal so far. These guys have really been working their butts off, and they're amazing people, and a lot of them are here. So, go up to them, introduce yourself, buy them a beer, do that, okay. But most importantly, we really need you to join us on this list of names. And here is where I put my obligatory picture of scary clouds and dire warnings. Because, Dries showed this awesome looking video, and it had all of this cool stuff in it, and everyone was like, wow, Drupal 8's going to be amazing. And what people forget is like, yeah, it's going to be amazing if we get all of that done. And right now, I don't know that we're going to get all of that done. And we see a lot of the initiative leads starting to feel the pressure of the deadline. They're really starting to burn themselves out because they feel like they're trying their hardest to get this stuff in. But people oftentimes look at what they're doing and they say, oh, that's great, but they don't actually help with the stuff that needs to get done. Patch reviews. They don't help with stuff like, just sitting down and hammering out code. They don't help with entering into discussions that have important architecture impacts and things like that. And so it's sort of one of those things where it's like we really need more people to help, or we're going to suffer a huge burnout problem, sort of like we did last year in London, if people remember that. So please, if you have the abilities, and you don't need to be a coder necessarily to do this stuff, if you're front-end developers, many of you are, the mobile initiative always needs your help. I'm sure Spark would really love to have some people working on it as well when we move to Drupal 8. Anybody at any skill level can find something to do to help Drupal 8 happen. So I wanted to do a couple of Mythbusters things to help with this, because a lot of people think that this is true, that you really need to be Albert Einstein to contribute to open source, right? I also thought this, believe it or not. I first installed Linux in 1995, something like that. It was when Debian Linux fit on 7 floppy disks. And these days it fits on 7 dual density DVDs that are taped to like 2 gigabyte hard drives. I don't know, it's huge. But back then it was very small. And that was the first version of Linux I installed. And I was really into open source. I thought, oh, this is cool, Firefox, yay, and stuff like that. But I always thought that you had to be Linus Torvalds, or you had to be Dries Buytaert, or something like that. Some really smart person with a PhD and all this kind of stuff in order to actually contribute to open source. But the fact is, that's not true at all. What is a contributor? A contributor is someone who has these 3 attributes, okay? They see something and they say, well, that's dumb, It's like, it's stupid that there's div, 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 span, 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 that kind of thing. They also see it and they say, well, I want to fix that, right? I see that that's dumb and I want to fix that. And then the third portion of that is I can do something about it. And that doesn't necessarily mean code. That could mean I have an office building and I could hold a sprint in my office building and I could sponsor an event where people could have, help. I could create some mock-ups for how this ought to look. I could do user testing with my content editors because they're obviously not in the Drupal core queue, but it would be really great to get their feedback to the developers. The people who intersect at these three things, those are the people that power open source. And you don't need to be Einstein. You don't need to be, you don't even need to have a lot of experience. A lot of our key core developers are people who didn't even know PHP when they came to Drupal. They learned it by reading other people's patches. And they learned it just from talking to people and trying things out and experimenting. And, that kind of thing. Another myth that a lot of people have is that this is how improvements are made in Drupal. So you have Gina the genius over here, right? And she's a genius, so she has a huge head, right? And she's a genius. And she's just sitting there, thinking to herself one day, I have this amazing idea. Just popped to the top of my head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whip out my text editor, which is probably Emacs, right? I'm just kidding. I know, okay. And everyone around her goes, wow, that's amazing. That is your best work yet. Okay, how many people think that's how core contribution or open source contribution happens? Okay, that is not what happens at all, and that is total BS. Now this is what actually happens. So you have like Edwina, the end user, okay? And she's mad because she just found a bug. And so she goes to the issue queue and she searches, she doesn't find anything in there, so she files a bug report. And I'm just gonna pause here. If the only thing that you ever contribute to an open source project is a bug report that makes sense, then that is an incredibly valuable contribution and you should pat yourself on the back. Because so many people are like, it's broke. Really? Okay. How is it broke? It doesn't work. Well, so having a bug report that's like, this is what happened and this is what I tried to do and all that stuff is really important. Then Paula the programmer wanders in and she's also angry because she hit the same bug. She searches the issue queue and she goes, oh, hey, there's already a bug report about this. That's great. Okay, I'm going to try and fix it because my client's having this problem. I need to fix it anyway. Why don't I go ahead and give that fix to everybody else? So she codes it up and she fixes her problem. Then she posts it to the issue queue and she marks it needs review. And then Tatiana the tester comes along. And Tatiana the tester has big Coke bottle glasses because all she does is look at bugs all day. So, so she looks at Paula's code and she's like, okay. But what she does is she posts feedback on that. So she says, well, your coding standards are a bit off. Also, maybe instead of doing 7,000 queries, you maybe just want to do one query and then iterate through the results. Whatever, the things are. But she'll review the code and she'll sort of like map it against their standards and stuff like that, and she'll mark it needs work. A lot of people are scared to do what Tatiana just did here, right? They're scared to say, oh, I don't want to criticize other people, right? I don't want to make them feel bad. So I'm not going to actually tell them it needs work. I'm just going to use the patch and move on with my day. But the lack of Tatiana's is actually a total morale destroyer. Because the worst thing to happen to Paula is she posts her thing as needs review and nobody cares, right? That destroys you. It's like, I worked really hard on this patch and I want people to use it. I want them to give me feedback. So when this needs work thing happens and there's really constructive feedback in there, that's the best thing you can do for Paula because she gets to learn from that. She also feels that somebody gives a crap about what she's working on. So please, if you have the technical chops to be able to do patch reviews, and you don't even have to know all the technical stuff. Even if you say, all I did was run through this as an end user, and here's what I did. I clicked this, and it worked for me. That's great, But getting Paula feedback is a critical piece to the process because that's how she knows her work is appreciated. So you mark it needs work. She says, oh, that's awesome, thanks. Here's another shot at it. Needs review again. And then you have Wendy, the poor soul stuck on Windows XP. And do you know what she's going to say? You totally know what she's going to say. She's going to say it breaks in IE6. And the only reason she's on IE6 or Windows XP is because she has this really old version of Word because she's a book author. So she says, also mind your spelling. So she found some spelling error in the comments or something. Marks it needs work again. And so finally, Paula's like, all right, one last time. Now it's better spelling and it's got all the bugs fixed. Let's try this again. And Tatiana filters back in there, and she goes, oh, sorry, needs review. Tatiana comes back, and she says, oh, hey, that is much better than before. Look at that. That's really great. And so she marks it reviewed and tested. And then once it's reviewed and tested, it goes to someone like me or someone like Dries, someone who has the ability to actually integrate those changes into core, at which point it might get marked needs work again or whatever. But the key point to take away from this is that it's none of these people that had the full answer to this problem, right? Edwina found the bug. She posted the bug report and had it made sense. Paula actually did the work on coding the patch, but not by herself because she needed the guidance of Tatiana and the spelling corrections of Wendy to know that the solution was solid. And so any of these things that you can do, you can help push an issue forward to RTBC, and that's really how we get changes made in Drupal. And we really do need more people to participate because on the subject of burnout, these are all of the people who have ever downloaded our software. Of that, there's a tiny red portion you can see here that are the people who bothered to register an account. Even if that was to spam us about shoes, they registered an account, so at least they cared that much. And then the people who actually did something with their account is like 0.5% of people that not only registered an account with Drupal.org, but they actually did something. They answered a support request. They posted a patch. They, did some triage on an issue queue sometime, and they closed duplicate support requests, or whatever it is. Very, very few people are helping. And so the Drupal that we all make our livings from, that we all love, is really built by just a fraction of the community, and they do get burnt out when they feel like people aren't helping. So to recap, time to kick ass with Drupal 8. If you want to start, here's a couple of really good tips. There's the Drupal core mentoring hours that happen twice a week on IRC every week. And this is dedicated time. So if you are kind of like the kitten under the stairs and you're like, I want to help, Webchick said you're not scary, but Earl Miles yelled at me in an issue queue one time, and I don't know. Okay, so that's fine. But basically, these people are mentors. They're there to help you. They specifically are there as friendly people to help you with any questions. If you don't know what Git is yet, come here. They'll help you out. If you are trying to get a development environment set up and it's not working for some reason, come. They'll help you out. If you're like, I'm actually kind of a badass coder, but I have no idea what needs help with Drupal 8 right now, they can help you out. And the great thing about these people is that they're actually holding an actual in-person mentoring hours sprint on Friday. So if you can be here on Friday and you want to get started with this stuff, please come because they will help you with whatever you need. They've got a lot of issues fabricated that are already ready to go for new people, new contributors coming in, and they're there to help you out with whatever you need. We also have, if you are one of those like badass coders who wants to know what you can do to help to push these things along, we also have a page under community initiatives at the Drupal core page. And this is basically all of the initiatives with who you contact, when they're meeting, where they're meeting. And here's the 5 things right now at this moment that would help push this initiative forward. So if any of those things look like things you can help with, you can jump in and you can help push those things. And so that's pretty much it. I wanted to give a little bit of slide credits. There's a bunch of people who helped me develop these things over time because this is, Drupal 8 is a crazy moving piece of software, so there's a lot of stuff going on. And I just want to say thank you and just ask if you had any questions. So thank you. All right. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know how the mic thing works, so you might need to yell it and I'll talk it into the mic. Really? I answered all your questions. Yes.
It's already clear that Drupal 8 will not be compatible with Drupal 7. And there was a discussion, I think, a year ago. What needs to be done maybe to make Drupal 9 compatible with Drupal 8? Is something happened on that?
Sure. So the question was, it's already clear that Drupal 8 is not going to be backwards compatible with Drupal 7, which is true. And then the question was, what is going to be done to help that problem? Oh, Dries' core conversation is starting in 10 minutes. We should wrap up here. Sorry, Google. Anyway, and the question was, what's going to be done to make that a little bit better in Drupal 9, which is a great question. So the first thing I just want to cover is you're right, it is not backwards compatible. Drupal has a philosophy which says we break your code and not your data. What that means is that there will always be an upgrade path provided for you between major versions of Drupal, But as we find more performant ways of doing things, more optimized way of doing things, more flexible ways of doing things, the core developers are free to actually rip things out and replace them with better technologies than we had before, because this is what makes Drupal agile, and this is what makes Drupal able to keep up with the stuff that's going on in the world. And then in terms of Drupal 9, the big barrier to backwards compatibility is honestly a lot of Drupal's current architecture, which is all procedural based. There's a lot of stuff like, a function will get an argument that's an array formatted exactly in this way, and as soon as you start changing that array to something else, or you even indent the, you add another top-level index there or something, you break APIs, which is why we're very constrained in Drupal 7 with what we can do. So this move to object orientation, this move to things like Symfony components and dependency injection and some of these other patterns is what's going to allow us to break APIs far less often. Because when we move to this pattern, what you can do is if you don't like the way something does something, you use a dependency injection container, you swap it out with something else entirely, and then you're able to move with it. Currently, there's no plans for backwards compatibility of Drupal 8 to Drupal 7. That ship has kind of sailed. It's not going to happen. So there will be an upgrade process that's about the same as the Drupal 6 to 7 upgrade process, which is like a pain in the butt. However, there are people very interested in doing something in the future, like preserving backwards compatibility for 2 releases or something like that. But it really requires a sort of like under the hood architecture refactoring that we're doing right now in order to support that better. Because you literally can't have both a HTML-centered desktop renderer engine and a REST-based REST-based API centralized content server coexisting at the same time unless the code base is completely unintelligible or unless it's really crappy performance. So that's one of the things that we're struggling with right now is how to merge both of those things. But there is talk in Drupal 9 and beyond of preserving backwards compatibility longer. It has to get buy-in from the core development team, who honestly doesn't see the value in that right at this moment. But I think as more people help with core development, it allows us to let those guys go, okay, I'm not quite as stressed out as I was before, so maybe we could take this on, this backwards compatibility thing. But the short version of that is we'll probably reopen that discussion when Drupal 9 opens for development. But for now, it is not backwards compatible. And if someone wants to create a backwards compatibility library and contrib, I'm sure a lot of people would love you for it. So, another question? I don't know how much time I have, actually. Do I have until 3? 2, I meant? 3. Ah, you poor suckers. No, I'm not going to keep that. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So the question was, well, as we move to Symfony, are there going to be changes to the way hooks work and function and stuff like that? Which is a great question because Symfony has its own version of hooks. They're called, I'm going to get this wrong, they're called like event subscribers, I think. And it's basically like that you, instead of the way Drupal works, which is like you say, hey, everyone, I'm saving a node. Does anyone want to do anything about that? And it goes through all of the modules and checks for module_save and then da-da-da-da-da. It does that a little bit differently, which is that it preemptively has a list of all of the events that you can subscribe to, and then individual modules can create event listeners or whatever to sort of listen for those events firing. Currently, the plan around using that Symfony event registration system is to use it for sort of hooks that need to fire before the module system is ready. So in other words, there was one that just came up the other day, actually. I think it was to load the configuration system. The configuration system needs to exist before the system module is available, for example, because the configuration system might have things like your database credentials or whatever. So in that respect, we're going to be using the Symfony event management system in order to basically replicate like hook boot and possibly hooks like hook init. There are some people that are trying to go balls out crazy and replace all of the hooks with Symfony stuff, but I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that would be too much of a change, and I think that the hook system that we have in Drupal is actually really clever, and it's very easy to explain to new people. It's like, once they understand what the hell a hook means, but you basically tell them it's like name of the hook, module name _ name of hook, and it's a really simple naming convention people can understand. The Symfony version is very clever, but it definitely requires more knowledge of object-oriented programming to really get it. So the plan in general is to reduce the Symfony hooks that we use to those that we need before the module system is loaded or just after the, it's kind of like the edge cases, and possibly in the installer and things like that. But to generally not use them core-wide unless the sentiment in the core queue changes dramatically over the next couple of months. In Drupal 9, though, that might end up happening. All right. I have T-shirts that basically say this, if anyone would like some. Go ahead and raise your hand. Whoa, OK. Oh, we need somebody who can throw a lot farther than I can to do this. OK. Yes? Did I? Oh. I spend a lot of time behind a computer, so I could use some help on this. Thanks. So I'm sorry, Kathy, could you say that again? And I think I'll ask my mic. So there is a BOF right after this session that you can go to get your development environment set up, and that's in the Montreal room. Do you know where that's located? On this floor. Somewhere. Follow Kathy. She's going to be walking there. But yeah, if you need help getting your development environment set up, right after this session, they can get you hooked up with MAMP or whatever you want. So awesome. One more question. Yes? Morton is asking for 5 dedicated front-end developers for tomorrow to sprint on the Twig stuff. Do I have any volunteers? I see 1, 2, 3. Come on, 2 more. 2 in the back, yes. So can you go find Morton, the king of the north, once I'm done talking? And he would love to get you set up to help with that stuff. Awesome. OK. Thanks.